I know it's dangerous to say this in a world of post-truth, but there are different levels of truth. And I think an artistic truth can be more sometimes meaningful than documentary truth. And my favorite quote is, we put it at the very beginning of Quiz, and it's from Picasso. And I think it says, art is not truth. Art is a lie that helps reveal truth.
Yeah, talk about making a drama out of a political crisis. As there's one man who's made a career out of taking our big national moments and turning them into big hits on stage and screen. It's James Graham. Here's a reminder of some of his big hits.
When Parliament dissolves at 5 p.m. today, I am no longer the member for Spelthorne, nor Jack here, the member for Croydon North East, nor you, the member for Paddington South. But Paddington, sadly, will go on without you. It is a lesson we all must learn.
If you find a potential voter, you hit them hard, and if it looks like they're going to bend, then you don't just walk away, pat yourself on the back, you double down, hit them again and again, right? With £350 million and Turkey, 350 million quid and Turkey again. 350 million quid and Turkey again.
He changed his mind, knowing that he would lose £15,000 if he gave the wrong answer. He went with Craig David, who he'd never heard of. And that's the right answer!
I never advocated for the nuclear bombing of North Vietnam.
Oh, you have. I'll give you time and place if it amuses you.
Well, you won't.
No, I will.
No,
Bill, don't step away from the record. You suggested the atom bombing of North Vietnam in your little magazine, which I do not read, but I'm told about, on February 23rd, 1968.
Now, Mr. Vidal, who boasts of not reading something he is prepared to misquote in the presence of the person who edits it.
Now, Billy Buckley, the quotation is exact.
Wow, there's a hell of a lot there. That was This House, of course, about the whipping operation to save the Callaghan government in '69. Channel 4's Brexit, the Uncivil War, featuring some guy called Dominic Cummings, instilling message discipline in 2016. ITV's Quiz, which is all about the coughing major who didn't actually cough on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire back in 2001. And finally, in that group, Best of Enemies, recreating the explosive TV debates between William Buckley and Gore Vidal during the 1968 US presidential campaign, which is currently running at the Noel Coward Theatre in London's West End. And I'm delighted that James Graham joins me now. Morning, James.
Hi, morning, Matt. How you doing?
Really good. Yeah, great to have you with us. We'll talk about the latest play and what you're working on next. But let's go right back to the beginning of your story. How does a young lad from a comp in Nottinghamshire become the preeminent, I can't even say the word, political playwright of our times? When did you start writing? When did you get the bug?
I don't know if I am the preeminent, but thank you for saying it.
I think I'm allowed to say it. I think if you said it, it would seem uncouth.
That would be, disgusting. Tom stuff was up there, I would think. But no, thank you. And it's for me, it was school basically, and that's why I get so worried about the collapse of arts education in state schools at the moment. But yeah, as you say, it was a pretty working class town in the Red Wall. It's the community where I set Sherwood on the BBC last year. And if it wasn't for just a really brilliant drama teacher and a working theatre in a school and a culture, I guess, of a school and a headmaster believing that working class kids should do plays, then I never would have started. So yeah, I began writing then.
So when you say writing at school, were you literally sort of writing plays and things when you were at school?
I was writing really bad, comics and novellas. I probably wouldn't have used the word novella when I was 14, but short stories, and none of them really political. My first love was history. I used to love going into history classes, and a bit like a Netflix returning series, turning up every episode to see who will win the French Revolution and things like that. So I found that really gripping, and that was my political awakening, I think, in terms of historical storytelling. So I actually began writing a bit fiction then, and then I went to university in Hull to study drama, and that's when I really started writing plays.
And I suppose it's interesting you say you liked history, because to some extent that's what you're doing, is you're bringing to life moments in history and all of the things you're talking about, whether it's 40, 50 years ago or something that happened 10 years ago. But that is what you're doing. And I suppose that for people, some people say, I didn't like history, it's really boring. But actually, history isn't boring because it involves people and literally drama.
Completely, yeah, and I can't pretend I invented this. Obviously, Shakespeare had a go at trying to make sense.
He was all right.
He was fine. He's stood the test of time. But what he did and what playwrights have done through Arthur Miller, if I can put myself in that category, through to me, is try to make sense of the present, the chaos of the political moment of the now, by picking a moment from the recent or the distant past and seeing it through that way, through metaphor, through analogy. And that's, I find that is hugely helpful for a writer and for an audience to go, we've been here before. Here's a story, as you say, it's a human story, a protagonist dealing with big human things, jealousy, ambition, rage, hatred, set against the backdrop of nation-changing events, a country at a crossroads, a country at war, a country ripping itself apart, civil war. And that just is the sweet spot for me. That's what makes great drama, the personal in the foreground with the national political scene in the background.
You also, one of the things which is more specific to your work, it struck me when I was thinking about it, is that you quite often take dull, well, I'm going to say boring situations, but I don't
you
mean
can say that, yeah.
dull situations where you sort of dull systems and structure are supposed to be, the norm, and then they come under strain. Whether that's in Parliament or how you debate in a TV studio, or and then it's the moment when those norms are bent so much that they snap, and that's the background. I mean, the pitch meeting when you said I'm going to do a play on the whipping operation in the late 70s must have been an interesting one, but actually it's a human story, but it's the very dull workings of a whipping operation suddenly snaps. It's because it's under so much strain.
That's exactly it. I find I have a sort of a mischievous and possibly masochistic enjoyment at presenting and pitching both to a theatre and to an audience the most implausibly entertaining evening, and then subverting that by trying to inject it with excitement and humour and action. So you're right. I mean, on paper, a play, This House, about the 1970s. And whips failing to pass legislation is not inherently thrilling. But like you say, for me, actually one of my great enjoyments also is finding particular systems and worlds, and working out how it runs in like a Swiss clock way, opening it up and seeing, oh, so that's how it turns. That could be Parliament. How does that building that we feel so familiar with, how does it literally work on a night-by-night basis? How do you get MPs into the Commons? What do you do if they can't get there because they're stuck in traffic or because they're having a psychotic emotional incident? How does a game show work, like on Quiz? How do you pitch that? What are the challenges if someone tries to break into your game show and steal £1 million? How do you build a newspaper if you're Rupert Murdoch and you're reinventing The Sun in 1969, which was my play Ink? Or how do you run a referendum campaign? The Brexit referendum affected all of our lives. But at the end of it, I realised I didn't know who any of these people were. I didn't know who Dominic Cummings was. I don't know how you set up a referendum campaign, how you set up the messaging, how you target that messaging, how you measure its effectiveness. So it's that geeky enjoyment of, sort of going under the hood of these national institutions, whether political or pop culture, and understanding both how they work, but then also what they say about us. And in particular, you mentioned the whipping office in This House. I feel like the joy of that is it is just human stories. We forget that MPs are not just ideologues who you interrogate on your shows. They're human beings who struggle. They struggle in the system, and in the 1970s, as you say, in particular, a system that came under huge strain. And in those moments, you start to really understand those systems. So what does Parliament has all these absurdities, but if you push it to its extremes, they start coming out, like dragging drunk and sick and dying people out of ambulances into the voting lobby to vote and that kind of thing.
And I suppose a lot of that that's the sort of, and again, this is a hallmark of a lot of your work, I think, the sort of best intentions gone wrong. The people starting out, they want to make the world a better place. They think that's better if their party's in government. And before you know it, like you said, they're dragging in dying patients. And similarly, in Best of Enemies, you've got William Buckley and Gore Vidal, both think they're going to raise the tone of debate in America. They're both sort of big intellectuals in sort of American, I don't know what you call it, civil society, and they think they're going to educate Americans in the debates of their times, and actually they end up having a massive row and threaten to punch each other.
Yeah, and I find that very moving. I find people's best intentions to elevate a culture or make a system work, and because we're humans and we fail in that, I think that is what is moving. So Best of Enemies, again, on paper, is an incredibly dry subject matter. It's about how the least successful American television network in the 1960s, which was ABC, how they came up with a new plan to cover the presidential election, and in particular the conventions that year in Chicago for the Democrats and Miami for the Republicans. And because they had no money, they invented a new idea, which was to get two pundits, two famous people, someone from the left and someone from the right, to debate and exchange opinions and viewpoints. And that had never been done before. And obviously, now that is a staple
it won't
part
catch
of
on. There's no way that sort of thing will catch on.
That's never going to happen. And like you say, the genuine desire was to get very clever people, public intellectuals, which was like a distant concept, erudite men and women who could really dig into the big national questions of the day. And I find it intoxicating when you listen, anyone can watch these clips online, the Buckley-Vidal debates. They're so impressive. They're like symphonic in the rhythms of how they talk and debate. And they talk about specific policies, but they also talk on a philosophical and a poetical plane about the soul of a nation and the direction of its travel. And I find it really inspiring. And then, of course, as you say, it all ends incredibly badly because they really loathe and hate each other and think the other person and their version of America, which they're trying to sell to the viewing public, is incredibly dangerous. And they explode, they say words and insults and slurs that had never been heard before on American television in American homes. But unfortunately, it was proved a huge ratings hit. And that's unsurprisingly. And so that model of turning discussion and debate into combat, and it being very personal, obviously is a long legacy, which we're living with today.
Yeah, it's amazing. Sometimes when particularly when we've got our columnist on, as we do every morning, sometimes people text and say, "Oh, look at you all agreeing," as if that's like a terrible outcome for a discussion on the radio that everyone. I mean, you don't want that all the time. It's interesting to have different perspectives, but that was that's seen as that. So, the thing that struck me, because I came to see it when it was on it at the Young Vic, about a year ago, and then came to see it again in the West End this week. And the thing that struck me watching it again is you're quite naughty, because or maybe there's an assumption that the sort of people who are going to come and see this, particularly maybe it was at the Young Vic more so than the West End, but a sort of a liberal metropolitan audience coming to see another James Graham play. And so what you do is you end up making us feel more sympathetic towards the right-wing commentator, William Buckley, and Gore Vidal, who in theory on paper the liberal metropolitan audience should feel more sympathy towards, is actually a bit more annoying. And in terms of who you're rooting for, are you doing that deliberately just to sort of tease it, or is it because actually the worst thing to do is to go and watch a play which is so sort of ploddingly obvious in its lefty credentials that it's actually just less interesting? Are you deliberately and teasing the audience like that?
Yeah, I am. It's a conscious choice to. It's a conscious choice to. I hope coming from a good place, which is. I just think it's an incredibly important and cathartic exercise to walk in the shoes of somebody you might disagree with or might not normally get to spend any time with. And as we all know, this is not an original thought, but more and more in the digital age, we are siloed into communities of concern and factions that normally appeal to our own bias. And I think, so therefore you go, well, what is the responsibility or the power of television drama or a stage play? It's hopefully, I think, to be a public square where different political stripes can come, and God forbid, even through the use of character and storytelling, you create empathy for a person by just asking the question, what are they doing? What do they want? What are they struggling with? And but I think it has to still be truthful. You can't just give the devil all the best lines for the sake of it. I think there is inherently in the story of Buckley and the Vidal, as you rightly observed, that is present. I think William F. Buckley went into this as a conservative with the best of intentions and was determined to debate in good faith. I think Vidal maybe didn't quite do that. He was more mischievous. He went low. He went for the low blows quite early on. He was very mean and very mocking of Buckley. But then the tragedy for me, you always have to search for what is the human tragedy in this. And of course, the tragedy for Buckley is that he was trying to sell conservatism, a respectable kind of right-wing conservatism, to America by saying, look at me, I'm very decent, I'm very kind, I'm very noble. And he loses his mind in front of the nation. He starts screaming and threatening physical violence. So he betrays his principle and his what makes him who he is. And whether you agree with his politics or not, and they're very problematic in the modern age. He was briefly pro-segregation in schools and things. He betrayed himself, and I find that very moving, whatever his politics.
I suppose there's also that thing as well about just making us check ourselves. If you think, well, I'm on the left, you can't just turn up and think, well, he's the one on the right, so I definitely don't like him. Let's find out what he's got to say first. Let's see what how he handles himself, what he's got to say. Likewise, if you're on the right, don't just assume, well, that person on the left, I'm not going to like them. Which is probably what's infected so much of our politics. James, I was struck actually looking back through your sort of back catalogue. You've done the 1960s, with Best of Enemies. Did the 70s with This House. You did the 80s with Sherwood, the 90s with Labour of Love, the noughties with Brexit. Where do you go next? Do you go further back and do the 50s, or could you do a drama based on what's happened? And there has been plenty of drama in the last 12 months.
It has, but how do you compete? That is, I think, the challenge for any satirist or dramatist in the modern age, when it's not just the level of drama, which is chaotic and insane, but it's also when politics changes to become, and this is slightly what Best of Enemies is about, when politics becomes aggressively performative anyway, like it is theatre, and some of the people in politics are essentially almost fictional characters in themselves. Like Donald Trump is a made-up character from a reality television show. Boris Johnson, to an extent, was always semi-performing a role. It's it's what value does drama bring to that, and can it help us make sense? Can it contribute to what you do, journalism, and can it contribute to everything else to inform our understanding? So I'll be honest, at the moment, I have no huge desire to write the 46 Days of Liz Truss as an epic operetta or a 5-minute monologue, because I just don't know. I think we all know what that story is. I know what happened there. You know what happened there. Someone who was unfit for that role proved themselves unfit and was out very quickly. So actually, I think what I would do in a really, really nerdy way would be to maybe go back to the 1820s and look at the succession of really short-term serving prime ministers like Canning and Viscount Goderich. I didn't expect to say the words Viscount Goderich on your show. I'm sorry for everyone.
This is a safe space for that sort of nerdy stuff. That is what we're here for.
Thank you. I think in the similar way that we said earlier, I think there's something about using history as a metaphor, as a vessel to try and make sense of the chaos of the now. So I will probably go back to them.
There's I don't know. I thought I was going to bring this up either. What's his name? Northcote, who was the anniversary of his death today. He was he was a Tory leader when Disraeli was in the Lords. He was basically the Tory leader in the Commons. When Disraeli dies, Salisbury takes over. But then when the Tories win the election, everyone assumes that he's going to Northcote's going to become the Prime Minister. But he's rubbish, basically. He's much too nice to Gladstone. So the Queen sends for Salisbury. Salisbury becomes Prime Minister, makes him Foreign Secretary, and then decides he's rubbish. So he decides, well, I'll be Foreign Secretary as well as Prime Minister. And on the day he calls him in to sack him, he goes into Downing Street and dies. He's waiting to meet Salisbury and dies on Salisbury's sofa.
Oh, my God.
That all happened today, and I've been writing something about it, which is why it's fresh in my mind. But it's an amazing story. That's what I knew nothing about. But you're right. That nugget of there being something a bit more. Maybe there's something in that for you. Anyway, you can have that. Is there anything? Is there anything? Have you ever sort of gone into something thinking this might work for something, and actually it's just turned out to be too boring?
Weirdly, no, but I'm sure that time is coming. I managed to, one of my early plays, I was a 21-year-old who wrote a play about Anthony Eden and the Suez Canal crisis, and that maybe was on the verge of boring, but I was actually quite proud of that. So, no, I think this will sound really trite and sentimental, but I think any life, any world, any workplace, any job, and certainly any role in public life, whether it's Prime Minister or the leader of a district council, I think you can always find the epic qualities of that and the meaningfulness of that, what it says about society, our culture. And I guess the common theme for me is Britishness, which is why, apart from Best of Enemies, which is set in the US, most of my plays are excruciatingly British, and I have no European footprint at all. People in Europe aren't doing my play about the Ashfield Labour constituency office for some reason. So but I'm never going to change, because you just have to be true to yourself. And as a nerd for that stuff, I think I hope we can always find the excitement in the most improbable of worlds.
So I've just checked. His name is Stafford Northcote. Even I got it wrong, and I was only reading about it yesterday. I vaguely remember, because this year's 30 years since Maastricht, and there's a lot of that sort of stuff knocking around. Did you and I once have a conversation where you said you were looking around around that area, or is that too much like this house and the sort of whipping operation to try and keep John Major's government together?
No, I'm still, yes, that is the play that's too boring to finish, but I am still cracking away at that. And I think it feels almost like a sequel to this house. I think if you speak to any whips, they will always tell you that I think there are three great whipping operations in modern history. The first was in the 1970s, which I've done during the minority government. I think the second was Maastricht and the Maastricht rebels, and that was still an age of people hiding in different houses and sneaking out, and votes being won and lost by a margin of 1 or 2. And then the third one, if I was to turn it into a trilogy, would be obviously Brexit. And if you can make the the Ben Amendment, if you can make that into a musical number, then you can do anything.
Finally, the day that you put on the Malthouse Compromise in the West End, that'll be an enormous achievement. What about? There's obviously a lot of discussion around The Crown and the extent to which you're basing things on real life events, but you don't, when you're writing, you don't know all the conversations, even if there are diaries or biographies and that sort of thing. How far can artistic license take you with the facts before you have to have a disclaimer at the start of the episode or in the program or whatever it is? Are you conscious of that, of how far you can push what is fact and what is fiction?
Yeah, I really am, and I loathe that disclaimer that's been forced to be put on The Crown at the very beginning. I think it's impossibly patronising to an audience who really does understand the contract between drama and the truth. But I take it really seriously, and not just because I don't want to be sued for defamation by Dominic Cummings or Rupert Murdoch. I do actually think I have a moral responsibility to try and present people fairly and accurately. But that doesn't mean I know it's dangerous to say this in a world of post-truth, but there are different levels of truth, and I think an artistic truth can be more sometimes meaningful than documentary truth. And my favourite quote is, we put it at the very beginning of Quiz, and it's from Picasso, and I think it says, "Art is not truth. Art is a lie that helps reveal truth." And I think that's what it is. You know that you're lying. I know the audience knows I wasn't there behind the scenes at Prince Charles's investiture. But if I can get the best available evidence to try and unearth the truth, and then the rest of it, I'm looking for a different quality. I'm looking for the essence of truth, not the detail.
And then, do you, just finally, because I said I would ask you the question, did you invent Dominic Cummings? Is it your fault?
I would love to think playwrights had that level of impact on history, but I think he definitely existed before I turned up, and I was very happy to introduce him to a popular audience.
Was it too, because it's the most recent thing that you, as in it's the thing you've done covering events most recently. With hindsight, was it too soon to do a Brexit drama? Or was it actually because people really knew nothing about what had been going on, and actually a version of that needed to be told?
Yeah, because there won't just be one single Brexit drama. There wasn't one single World War II film. As our understanding evolves, new TV dramas and new plays and new poems and new paintings will come out. That was just the first draft. And actually, we forget this now, but there was a time when no one knew who Dominic Cummings was, if you can imagine that. And I think getting Benedict Cumberbatch to play him and to analyse the role of the advisor in a referendum campaign was really important.
And so what can we expect from you next? I know Best of Enemies is on in the West End. What's the next, apart from the never-ending Maastricht drama, what's coming down the tracks next from James Graham?
I'm doing a second series of Sherwood, which is a BBC drama.
Great.
So there's other bad things have happened in Nottinghamshire in the past, so I'm going to be digging into that. So that we're going to start filming that in the summer. I had a musical with Elton John.
Yeah, of course. We haven't even discussed that. Yeah, that's a whole separate thing. The Tammy Faye.
It's televangelism in the 80s. It's really fun. So hopefully that will come have a future life this year as well. So yeah, there are things.
And actually, just finally on that the Tammy Faye thing, the sort of tele-evangelism quiz as well with Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. They're sort of based around this idea of sort of the shared national experience. Everyone was watching the same thing at the same time. Do you sort of mourn the loss of that? I mean, clearly, actually, Sherwood was a big hit and people were sort of following that a lot. But is it harder to capture that in the same way? Maybe that's why theatre's sort of doing so well, because actually you are at least having the shared experience with the people who are in the theatre at that exact moment.
Exactly, it's a collective thing, and you share it as a community. And I detect no loss of appetite for that at all. And that's why, amazingly, Happy Valley or thankfully shows like Quiz or Line of Duty still get these epic amount of figures. About 10 million people wanted to watch Line of Duty at the same time, and that's because, in the absence of any other elements of our public realm, the closing of pubs, of leisure centres, of social clubs, we still need to be a nation, and that means sometimes sharing stories together at the same time, and people really still want to do that. They want to be able to binge certain shows, but I think it's vitally important that we keep that linear experience sometimes so that we can feel a community.
Yeah, absolutely right. That's why the whole nation gathers around the radio between 10 and 1 every morning to listen to this.
100%.
James, it's been brilliant to speak to you. Best of luck with all. Good to catch up with you. James Graham there. Thanks very much for joining us on Times Radio.